If my volume is too low or too high, just send me a chat so that I can adjust that for you. Today we're going to be talking about employee development, measuring employee performance. So how can we get the most out of our employees? And this particular webcast focuses a lot on what we call the individual development plan, and that term may be familiar to many of you on this call today. My name is Linda Janak, and I'm the CEO of TalentGuard. And TalentGuard is a consulting and software company in the strategic talent management space, and you'll learn a little bit more about us at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to get started on this webcast. So I'd like to introduce you to Jerry. Jerry is the CEO of a medical device company. And Jerry is new to this medical device company. He was recruited in from a prior company that he had achieved significant and numerous successes in terms of bringing the company to market leader #1 position. And this company, Medco, has been around, as you know, for many, many years, has about 15,000 employees. But they've never been in a lead position, although they have great products and they're very competitive. They can't quite seem to get their act together to be in a leading position. So what was attractive to the board with Jerry is that he was known for his performance improvement system. And this is a system that he had developed at his several prior companies to drive excellence in some corporate numbers as well as through people. Just a little bit about Jerry's performance improvement system, and you might remember from our career pathing discussion a couple of weeks ago that we really focused a lot on the strategic planning side of the house. How do you actually come up with a strategic plan and put it into operation? Well, this is something that is a little bit higher level than the strategic plan, and this really looks at how do we operate as an organization to drive excellence. It's very, very high level and it's very strategic, and it's not a lesson in performance improvement, but what is important is that all of these components, from your mission and vision, how you collect data and what type of data you are going to be tracking in terms of performance metrics, the number of meetings and the processes that are going to be required to actually measure performance, and how are you going to actually track it and improve it once we identify the things that are working and not working, and then how do we deploy it internally in an organization. Now, this is a system, as I said, that Jerry has used for quite some time, and it's a process that has been in implementation now for about 3 months within Medco. And I'd like you to meet the executive team that's accountable for deploying this internally. So on Jerry's team is Thomas, who leads sales, Joel, who leads marketing, Kathleen in HR, Michael in customer support, and David in finance. This is what we call the task force, as well as his leadership team, that is going to be accountable not only to Jerry but to the board as well. So as Jerry started to deploy this internally and get everybody on board, it was a huge shift in the way that this organization conducted its business. They were focused on numbers, but not very many through the strategic planning process. They did set goals, but they didn't measure it down to the individual and then have a process that could be repeated. Through this exercise, what Jerry started to observe is that this team that he put on this task was struggling in a variety of ways, struggling to understand the level and the effort that is required to actually drive corporate performance. And they also started to struggle in their particular roles because Jerry and the board and the executive team had increased the performance dashboard so significantly that the executive team wasn't yet ready to handle that level of growth. So Jerry knew that Medco needed a better way to maximize its human potential and align it with the direction that he wanted to set for the company. As he started to look at his team, lots of observations were made about the people that he was working with because he could see their performance day in and day out. Joel needed to be a better team player. There was a lot of friction across the table with his actual peers. Thomas was having a very difficult time delegating important tasks. Kathleen, although very, very smart, she basically wasn't at the table. She was assertive, but she could easily be swayed to move off a particular point even if it was important. David needed to increase his emotional intelligence, and Michael just needed better communication skills. He was a little bit abrupt. So Jerry's task in leading them through this basically performance improvement, employee development phase was to think about how he could foster positive and sustainable results so that they really could meet all the objectives that they set. But what he found as he was moving through this process is that Jerry is a very strong numbers guy. And what he didn't realize walking into Medco is it's a very people-oriented company. A lot of these people have worked together for a very long period of time. A lot of them are friends. It's a very friendly environment. And he didn't want to lose that. But he knew that he also had to adjust his style going in an environment that was so different from what he was used to. So as Jerry started to share his particular observations with his team knew that, there are things that just weren't working even though they had set up this performance improvement system. And really it was about the alignment and the alignment of the goals, the behaviors, and the processes. Now, they knew they had great goals, and they knew that they had some really incredible competencies because they had set those in motion. And you'll notice that in our succession planning presentation, so you could definitely reference that of how they did that. But how do we actually bring those things together in a process that would really show that we're moving the needle? So Jerry engaged HR, and if you remember from past presentations, this is Sarah. Sarah works for Kathleen, and she's accountable really for a lot of the talent development initiatives. And the company, through Jerry's efforts, have gone through an entire 360 review program. They just completed an extensive performance review using all the new competencies based on the role. The succession plans had been put in place before Jerry, but they started to look at these plans and started to assess based on some of our new directions, do the people still fit there? And the career pathing project, which, as I mentioned, we did last 3 weeks ago. But what happened was Sarah had lots of information in kind of these disparate silos, and she really needed a way to pull it all together so that the people side of the house could really be in tune with that alignment process. So Sarah realized that what they were not doing a very good job at is pulling all of this information together in a way that was centralized and could give a view to the complete employee. And TalentGuard is really an advocate for the IDP, or sometimes people call it the EDP, Employee Development Plan. It really is the hub where all information flows, kind of in the center, where you have that talent profile, you have all that performance data, you have that 360 data, you have that successor data, and the talent IDP is the place that's going to show the employee all of their gaps, all of the areas where they need to improve. It keeps their career goals, and it enables both the employee and the manager, as well as HR, the opportunity to see in one holistic view this employee and where they need to develop, and then prioritize that development based on a particular schedule and the particular goals that are important to the company. So Jerry's mission when he came in, what he said to Kathleen at first was, every single employee in this company needs to have an IDP, and I want it done, in a matter of months. Now, if you've ever gone through the IDP process, you know that putting 15,000 IDPs together is near impossible. So HR had to do a lot of level setting with Jerry to get him to really focus on what is it that he wanted out of the IDPs, and then start in a smaller scope so that they could really start to measure what types of things do we want to measure from an employee perspective, and how do we report up on that data. So what Sarah decided to do is start with a small group of people to lead through this process, and what we're going to do today is focus on a particular employee, and the employee that we're choosing is Thomas. So let's take a look at Thomas. As we said, Thomas is the head of sales. He's been with Medco actually 2 times. He started his career out in early 2000, went to a couple of different companies, and then came back in 2006. He has extensive experience selling in this area. He's got a master's degree. He's a very high performer, always hit his numbers, very likable guy. And prior to Jerry, was seen as somebody who is a high potential and who could move up and take on a lot more strategic initiatives within the organization. So Jerry and Thomas meet, and Jerry wants to share some of the observations he's made on Thomas's particular performance. So, as I said before, the succession plans were done before Jerry. Once Jerry came in and worked with the HR team to really look at what did the succession strategy look like before Jerry and then post Jerry, a lot of the people that were originally on that matrix fell off. And they fell off because some of the competencies and some of the goals changed. And that's very typical of, of an organization, and that's exactly how it's supposed to work. Year over year, people come on and people come off. And Jerry was looking at, and Thomas was his goal, to be the leader, basically the GM or president of Latin America. And Thomas had put a lot of time into this, from taking Spanish lessons, spending lots of time in Latin America, understanding the business, understanding the market, understanding the culture immersion classes. So this is a place where Thomas really has his heart on. So he was disappointed by that news. And the reason, some of the key reasons are some of these. What Jerry observed was that Thomas was spending too much time focusing on busy work, and just things that really he shouldn't be focused on, worried about things he shouldn't be worried about, and that Thomas was living by his 4-page task list, the big yellow notepad. So what was happening was Thomas wasn't participating in the executive meetings because he was too busy writing down all the tasks that needed to get done, so it wasn't freeing his mind up to be able to have some of the strategic debates that Jerry liked within his executive team. After the 360, we noticed that Thomas needed several areas of focus in terms of development. From the delegation, again, was a critical one. The other one was employee development and employee recognition. So sometimes, the environment, if you will, has to support that development, because as you can, from what I've told you, Thomas is a stellar performer, hit all his goals, his team's always hitting the goals or succeeding the goals, but sometimes it's just not about that particular performance, because you have to constantly look forward about where the organization needs to be. So, Thomas, after getting so many attaboys, was suddenly in a position where somebody was telling him he needed to develop. So it was time to get help from HR. So Jerry, as I said, Jerry was a real numbers guy, very objective and analytical, and he was in an environment that was more, I'm just going to say more friendly and outgoing, if you will. So Jerry knew that he had limitations, and instead of learning on the job to help develop Thomas in the way that Thomas needed to be developed, he wanted Sarah first to find a coach for Thomas, so that based on all the feedback, we could really get a good plan for Thomas to move forward with. And it just so happens that Sarah has had a great relationship with a career coach that they had been working with for quite some time. Her name is Fran. And Fran has numerous credentials, including she is certified as a PCM, a professional career management, so she has a very specific methodology about how she approaches coaching. And the real fundamental approach that Fran has is, she's one tough cookie. However, she knows that people are human. When it comes time to talking about your own personal development, that it's like walking a tightrope because people are sensitive. That's just the way it is. So she, as her style, has a very nurturing approach. Now, she doesn't babysit, and she says what needs to be said, but she does it in a way where the employee feels that the development truly is all about them, and that is a really hard thing to do. So first and foremost, the right thing to do, right, is for Fran to meet with Jerry, because she needs information. She really wants to understand from Jerry, what is it specifically that you see in terms of development gaps, and really what do you want Thomas to address first? She would ask him questions like, how do we know when Thomas is hitting the mark? What things are you going to measure? What are you going to look for as he's going through this process? So they had some incredible dialogue around those expectations and starting to refine what those expectations should be. Next, she had to meet with Thomas, and she needed to meet with Thomas because she wanted insight. Is this going to be a person who's ready for coaching? Is he going to be open? Does Thomas recognize that he needs help? Is he going to be on board? Is he going to be guarded? What concerns does he have? In order to have any kind of effective coaching or manager relationship, you need to understand these things about people. And if you can't understand these things about people and you go right into the performance discussion, it's going to be a very difficult one to get through and to evolve and continue on. So of course, Thomas is going to react, right? He's, he has his preconceived notions about coaching. He's been around the block, and he shared with Fran that several people have had coaching in the company before, and it seems like they've just been pushed out. So she had that hurdle to overcome. He was also afraid that the sessions might be shared with Jerry and with HR. What are people going to think if they think, or if they know he's working with a coach? But he also acknowledges that he does need help. So before Fran can move on, she has to first build trust with Thomas and talk him through each one of these points. And she does that, and she does it effectively. And, she can't guarantee, of course, that somebody wouldn't be pushed out, but she had the commitment from Jerry, and Jerry had the conversation with Thomas, that it truly was about development, and that he wanted to build a development culture, and he needed Thomas's support to demonstrate that throughout the company and to the rest of the team. So it took Jerry a little time to come around, but he eventually did, and he gets on board, and he decides he's going to give it everything he's got and trust the process. So once he lets his guard down, this is where the great work can begin. And you have to start with the data that's available. So Jerry and Fran and their quote-unquote initial intake, that's what we'll call it, went through his 360 feedback. And it wasn't Fran reading it. It was Thomas walking Fran through what he thought was important, the things that bothered him, the things that worked for him. What did it mean to, what did these specific points mean to him? Like, how was he interpreting what some of the competencies meant, to really get a good understanding of where his head was at. She also went back and looked at all of his past performance reviews, and it was a little difficult because some of them were manual. There was just one that was automated, so she could track that. But she also spent time getting to know him and his organization and his people, and taking stock of what he thought of his peers and what he thought of the people that worked for him. Because remember, all of these people are going to be evaluators of Thomas. So in demonstrating his improvement, we have to demonstrate it up, down, and across the organization. So having that understanding is key. So he decides to be completely transparent. So, he knows that delegation stood out as a weakness. He wasn't going to deny it. He was struggling. He was working 7 days a week. Actually had to go to the hospital a few times from exhaustion, quite frankly. And he knew that he was starting to, or he was afraid that he was going to miss some of the objectives. He saw the writing on the wall, and he did not want that to become, he did not want performance in the area of his sales numbers to become an issue. And he was very, very disappointed about the discussion he had with Jerry about that succession planning role. So really is opening up, starting to trust, and Fran needs to prove lots of things. But before she can move forward, she really has to circle back again with Jerry and Thomas together, because this is where we have to level set first. So after Fran puts together her initial findings about what needs to get done and what needs to be focused on, they start to prioritize the development needs. They start to really put definition or further definition around the competencies. They outline the critical success factors, and they outline the key performance indicators. So that way, at the end of the engagement, we're going to be able to literally check a box or not check a box and figure out, you know, where have we moved the needle, where do we continue to move the needle, and, you know, what are those actions that are going to be required to facilitate that process. So what happens is, through this process, she recognized that, yes, Thomas needed help, but there was also some forces within the organization that were getting in the way of Thomas being able to achieve the level of success that both Jerry and Thomas envisioned for himself. And this is really important, because sometimes you can have a really stellar employee, and if you put that employee in the wrong environment, it's going to be very difficult for them to achieve. So when you are looking at performance, you can't just look at the individual. You also have to take stock of what's going on in that particular environment, whether it's a department, whether it's a business unit, whether it's a specific team, to see if there are forces that are working against that performance. And through her analysis, she realized that there were some forces that she would have to take up with Jerry at a later date, so that we can remove some of them before we go live with the entire IDP rollout. And you can see here what she did is said, you know, from a nutshell, you know, let's document the present level of performance. Let's document the desired level, and, you know, what is that one goal that we're going to focus on to know that we've had success in this engagement. And it's important to Fran, because she also wants to be able to work with this organization, so she has to prove her value. So they decide that it's going to be a 3-month development plan for Thomas. And the development plan, as I said, is the cornerstone. So what needs to be done, and I do not see this happen very often, is that the entire 3-month plan must be built out in advance before the actual coaching engagement begins. And what I mean by that is, you have to start with the basics. So if we're talking about delegation, you have to start with something fundamental as, what is delegation? What does it mean to you? How does delegation impact you? How does it impact employees? How does it impact your organization? And these are all individual session topics that build from the basic concept up to a more advanced level concept. You have to outline the activities that will be required of Thomas, the resources that will be used, and how these sessions are going to unfold. Are they weekly? Are they biweekly? Are they monthly? So that both the employee and the coach and or manager are able to give the time necessary to support that process. So what's also important, whether you're a coach or a manager, is that relevant and frequent feedback about how the individual is doing is critical to enabling the motivation to move through the process, as well as the morale, keeping that attitude high, because that's really what it takes. High morale, being very excited about the process, and learning something new. So what got in the way of that as they started to work together is that Thomas has to travel frequently. Of course, he's in sales. And so it wasn't that Thomas wanted to miss the sessions, but sometimes he would be away. So in order for them to carry on weekly and have Thomas commit to that, they decided that they would have to do something beyond the physical face-to-face sessions. So what worked for Medco, and not even Medco, it was a pilot with Thomas, was to use an electronic tool that would enable the tracking, the documentation, the follow-up, the project management that went along with this individual development plan. So being able to see, much like in a Facebook way, see the comments between Fran and Thomas, to be able to upload documents, to be able to share, and to track it as they were going to make sure that they were on track. And also either being able to do it via Skype or some other mechanism, having that as an option so that they could bring these two things together, and that really kept the sessions going. So having a tool beyond paper and pen, which most IDPs are, can really give visibility into the progression of the development plan. So let's talk just a little bit about that 3-month process and how Fran was able to increase performance over time. Well, she has a very simple approach, and this is something that she learned through her coaching efforts, and she teaches managers, and she calls it PDA. And what it means is, what are the expectations that need to be set with the employee prior to session, during the session, and after the session? So prior to the session, the definition of that is, what activity, this is in Fran's court, what activity does Fran need to assign to Thomas prior to the meeting to set the foundation for that session? And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Then during the session, what are they going to focus on as it relates to that particular topic, and taking stock of what's going on right now and what needs to happen. And then after the session is, what linkage event, what linkage assignment does Thomas need to take on and go do in order to, test and apply and act and do, so that he can demonstrate the new knowledge to his peers, to his employees, and to his leader. And these are very specific, observable behaviors. So let's break it down just a minute as an example. So prior to the session, for example, was a topic on learning to delegate. And this is kind of mid-session, midway through the process where we're actually learning how to do it. So, what's some of the best practice out there on delegation and how one could do it? So one of the things she had him do is do a 6-page case study and actually write up his answers, not just read. And the other thing she wanted him to do now is to really start organizing his task list. As I told you in the beginning, he has 3 pages of task lists, and when Fran went through them, she could see that it was in complete disarray. So what she wanted him to do was to really take stock of what was listed on that paper, and they agreed on 4 or 5 buckets. One was employee development, one was sales, one was process, and then there was like one other. Because what she wanted to do was to show him specifically the types of tasks that he was spending his time on, and also show that as an executive leader, 70% should be managing people, 70% shouldn't be on very detailed task work. So that would happen before. And so when they came in, they started to look at those buckets and started to really talk about, what types of tasks should be delegated and why, revise the task list, really think about, do we have the right themes, do we have the right buckets, what buckets does Thomas need to keep, and what buckets need to go away, right? It gets down to this level of detail. Why? Because we're coaching somebody who doesn't understand this task. And what does the world need to look like? Well, the world for Thomas was that he wasn't going to have a task list anymore. Or if he did, it was going to be less than half a page. So what did Thomas have to do after the session? Well, his linkage assignment was for all tasks that they deemed non-strategic. So all the very specific ones. He needed to recommend who would be best to delegate to and why, and then also make notes of what reservations does he have, what skills do they think the employee has and does not have, how they will be successful, and what and how long they think that person would take in order to do it. So that was it. Now, he didn't go delegate those tasks yet, because the next session after that would be, how do we actually start that delegation process? What's the right way to do it? How do we communicate it? How do we hand it off? How do we check up on it? How do we follow up on it, so that we have the right balance? Because remember, it's a change for the employees as well, and it has to be handled delicately, because they're used to him being a certain way. So his job was that, and then again, it would circle back week after week, building on each other. So at the end of these 12 sessions or so, Fran decides that she wants to do just a very focused mini 360 review only on the 5 or 6 delegation indicators that they had used in the prior 360, and she added some new ones on. And what she did, if you're not familiar with the 360, is she had Jerry, some of his peers and some of his employees, contribute specific feedback. So they did that process, and it was a very quick one. I think it was maybe 4 or 5 questions. And then she compared the data from the first 360 to the data now, and as well as the feedback and the comments. And what we could see is that there had been significant improvement in very specific areas. And now they knew that they were doing the right things. But, what's good enough, right? So that's something you also have to determine. Do we want them to be an expert at delegation, or do we get them good enough where we can then move on to another particular topic over the next 3 months? But that's something that has to be discussed with the manager. So we decided that, this is good. So Fran shared the results with Thomas, and Thomas realized, wow, I was very skeptical about coaching. I really didn't have high hopes for the process. It was the first time he had gone through a coaching initiative, but meeting after meeting after meeting, he was sharing feedback with Fran on, an employee said this, a manager said this, I'm seeing this happen. I had my first project come back when I delegated. Here's what worked, here's what didn't, and my team's morale is changing, because as you know through my 360, he got dinged on employee development and recognition. So when you delegate, you're hitting multiple things, not just delegation. So he was very excited about what was happening. And it wasn't just about his delegation skills. He was really learning how to be an effective coaching manager as well. So, of course, because of the confidentiality and how they agreed to set up the relationship, Fran encouraged Thomas to share the outcomes with Jerry and to sit down and walk through the process of, where they were and where they ended up. And Jerry agreed to give it 3 months where he wouldn't bug both Thomas or Fran through that process. So he does that, and Jerry's very impressed with the progress and shares what he's observed. Now, what Thomas did is he actually invited Jerry in after the 3-month engagement to actually have a look at his Talent Advance, his IDP dashboard, and just shared it with him, what the experience was like, what it was like tracking, the time it took to do it, what the outcomes were, all of those sorts of things. And he was very impressed with that. Why? Because it was all right there. But what was more important to Jerry is that over the course of that time, he had made his own observations about Thomas's behavior. First and foremost, that Thomas never showed up to the executive table with a notepad again. And that was really important to Jerry, because he wanted his team to change their behavior and really focus on growth discussions and not just task lists. So Thomas was very present, and his teammates also started to notice it, and it affected their performance and how they were engaging. And it was an open dialogue. The whole team knew that he was going through the coaching process, and because Thomas had such a good experience, the other people who may have been guarded before started to let that guard down a little bit more. So what you're seeing is that exchange of a CEO saying, I'm on board with this, I think that this can work, so what would have to happen next? So Fran knew that further change was needed, and it's great, and she was very excited to be part of that engagement, but she really needed to have that frank discussion with Jerry, because she knew that having a coach for every single executive or every single director or every single employee was not sustainable. And she really encouraged Jerry to become a better coaching manager, and that he should encourage his entire team to be better coaching managers. So for this engagement to work and to truly have strong IDPs that are put into action, that they need to be trained on how to do it, how to have the conversation, how to lead someone through a performance plan, knowing that you can't have many specific competencies to develop in a 3-month period. You have to really focus, and you have to move the needle and lead it through and know, how much to give and when not to give and all of those sorts of things, so that the entire team could drive excellence in performance using the same language, methodology, frameworks, if you will, the same common language. It's really difficult when an organization has 50 different coaches and they're all teaching something different. So that was one of her strong recommendations to Jerry, which leads to the moral of the story. IDPs, they're extremely important, but they're not important if they just list a bunch of training sessions like take, PowerPoint 101. That is not a development plan. A development plan needs to be specific and objective. It needs to focus on 1 or 2 development areas every 3 months or so. It needs to contain reasonable goals. It needs to be complete. It needs to be managed. Progress should be measured every 3 weeks or so. You got to also recognize and reward participants for positive progress, and that doesn't just necessarily mean monetary. It's those subtle things of, I'm recognizing that you're doing a good job. And then you have to include managers who've been trained as coaches to drive performance every day. It's not something that should happen at the end of the year as a one-time planning cycle. So because of these IDPs and the whole coaching engagement process, there are some great benefits that came out of having a plan like that. Better and more motivated employee. Thomas is very excited. He knew the specific things that he needed to do in order to, 1, please his boss, and we all know that, we have a tendency to want to do that. He knew it was required to get back on that succession dashboard. He was an absolutely better manager to his team and was more engaged. He was a stronger leader, focused on the right things, so he became even more valuable to Jerry. He was a great example of how to be coached for performance and then how to coach. And then, as I said, a solid succession candidate, which is really Thomas's career path and goal. That concludes the specific content around employee development and what methodology can you use in order to drive better engagement, better morale, and better retention through actually focusing on a very actionable development plan that leads people to have that personal growth that they're looking for. Now, I know I touched upon Jerry and Jerry needing work, so we tended to focus more on the employee in this one. Now what we're going to do in the next session on October 24th is talk about how to make the managers be better coaches for the employees. So we're going to spend an extensive amount of time on the framework side of it for managers and really break that down. In addition to that, you can always schedule a demo to talk about Talent Advance, which is our development tool that supports 360-degree feedback. It supports online collaboration. You can invite coaches and managers and HR into the plan or not. You can keep it really closed and confidential. It aligns all of the corporate goals, your performance goals, and your own career goals with one view. And what happens in the development plan is when all of these things get fed into the IDP, because we can do content mapping, whether it's with your learning management system or our content, we can automatically serve up the right resources that cater to those specific competencies that you have decided are important for those particular roles. Now at this time, what I'd like to do is open up the line for any questions or comments about the presentation. And as you know, what we're going to do probably, within the hour after this call, once it's saved and uploaded, it'll be saved and uploaded to the webcast area, and we will send out an email to you letting you know where it is with the link, so that way it's easy for you to find, so you can download it and always go back and look at it later. And just one more comment on that point. Since these are episodes, they build on one another. So if you want the full story, I would also encourage you to download the episodes in order, starting with performance. So I've got, let's see, the first question. Let's see. Is this development plan available for download? And that was asked by Richard. And Richard, are you talking about the specific one that I shared with you today in this presentation? Let's see, scroll back. I just want to make sure. The paper version. I think you're talking about this one? I just want to make sure. Or were you talking about the example, like a screenshot of the software? Yes. Yes, I can make that available for you. That's no problem. Do you want to see it filled out, or you just want a template? Yes to both? Awesome. I will absolutely do that. I'll actually post it in the same area as the webcast for anybody else who may want to download that. Any other questions? Okay, I've got a question from Candace. What would you recommend for organizations that do not have a designated career coach role? Candace, that's a wonderful question. And in this particular example, Medco, they didn't have a dedicated career coach role. What they did is they hired in a consultant. So there's lots of different credentials out there and lots of different coaches. I think there's something like 40,000 specific career coaches. But they actually use TalentGuard, of course, and they use TalentGuard because TalentGuard had invented a very specific career coach framework, and they have the training and the coursework and the results and the testimonials that have shown this career coaching methodology to work. In addition to that, what Medco decided to do was use that specific training program to train the managers as coaches, so that everybody was talking the same language, the same framework. They knew the development processes. They could use the same tools, and that per person was just a couple $100 per person, and they could take it on their own. So they decided to do the e-study. So that's what they chose to do. Now, what we're seeing more and more of is that a lot of organizations are now bringing in a dedicated career coach or career coach center, if you will, so that they can be the intermediary. So what employees don't want to do is talk to HR about some of the struggles they're having because they're afraid it'll be on the performance review. They're sometimes afraid to talk to the manager about how do I improve. So a career coach can act as an incredible confidant in bridging together and being that trust advisor to help the employee move the needle while also kind of triaging what the manager thinks and what HR thinks, and then putting a person on a plan. And we're seeing that a lot more in business. So I hope that answers your question, Candace. If not, you can always just call me personally and we can walk through some more. So Leah has a question. As a consultant, how do you come into a company with these tools? Leah, I would encourage you to take a look at the PCM, or I think it's called Become a Career Coach, on our website, because it talks a lot about that. All our coaches are given the tools that they need to be successful as career coaches, and we have worldwide about 350 coaches that we use One, because we're going to do a career coach match with our system where we can match it's almost like Match.com, where you can do the employee profile to the coach profile, and it recommends the kind of coach that would be good for you, but then all the coaches use the same tool. So just take a look there, and if you don't see what you need, again, give me a call, and I'm happy to walk you through it. John has a question. In many organizations, hiring an outside career coach is not recognized within their culture. Any suggestions to turn that around? John, we run into this all the time, and I think in every engagement that we've been in, for as large or small as the companies have been, and for as much that is known about coaching, there's still a lot of confusion about is it an executive coach, is it a business coach, is it a performance coach, is it a career coach? And I really believe that an organization has to solidify on one of those strategies. And we mostly do executive and career coaching. But what you need to do is demonstrate the process first with one person. And that happened. This Midco is an actual real company that we were working with just under a pseudo name. And originally when we went in there, the CEO and the president did not believe in coaching whatsoever. And the HR team had to basically say, putting my neck on the line, that this process is going to work. So they had a lot of trust in the coach, and you have to be able to have that, because it's really hard to put yourself out there, thinking that it could potentially fail. And you lead one person through the process. And what you don't want to do is you don't want your most difficult employee, and then you don't want your superstar. You want somebody who's struggling in a particular area, and to lead them through that process with all the things that I've talked about. And you have to have at least 3 months. You just can't do a month, because you cannot see somebody moving the needle in that time frame. So do it with one person for that short period of time. It's money well spent. I mean, you could spend anywhere, I guess it depends on the coach, from, gosh, $5,000 to $11,000. Let's just say that. And it could be even a little more, a little higher. So I've heard coaching engagements as low as 4 and as high as 30. But you got to find a system that works. You got to have that visibility as a team, and then you've got to prove it. And then once you prove it, what tends to happen, and this did happen in my case, I literally got a letter in a bottle of champagne that said, I didn't believe in this process, it worked, and then I ended up coaching their entire executive team. So, and then it went from the executive team to the VP team, and then the VP team to the director team, and then it started to evolve from there. So it was a really great experience. I hope that helps. Any other questions? We still have 5 or so minutes, and I'm happy to stay on the call. If anybody, or thoughts or ideas, or if you've had any challenges that you want my opinion on, I'm happy to provide that as well. I'm sure that would benefit the whole group. No? Wonderful. Well, if you want to share some thoughts on the format of this presentation, I would love those, because I do try to build those in. As you know, if you've been with me for the last, I think 7 or so episodes, I do build in all of the feedback that you send me, or as much as I can. And we do kind of like this episode format that builds on one another, so that as you're going and rolling out your program, you can leverage best practices in your particular environment. Awesome. Well, without further ado, I think that we can call it another wrap. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or send me a note, and I'm happy to help you. And also, we will be uploading this, like I said, probably within the hour or so. So thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to share your time with me on the telephone and share your questions. And I look forward to seeing you on October 24th, where we talk more about the manager. Thank you so much. Take care.